Well. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Mike is here. Garrett is here.
Howdy.
And we've got a special show today, a little different than usual. I'll fill you in. I got some bad news a minute ago. I'm in this fucking bedroom doing this show because, as listeners know, I just moved to Arizona a couple months ago, and so I've been getting estimates on building a studio out. And today's estimate was $68,000. So that's exciting and fun. I will not be paying $68,000 to re-put together my studio, so we will continue to wait for a little bit. But without further delay, I've been talking about doing this show for a while. I've been thinking about talking to this gentleman for quite a while, Craig Jardula. You can follow at Yo Pasta on Twitter, formerly or on X, formerly Twitter, as people say. The Convo Couch. Pasta to go. Now, I for background, I saw an interview that you did, Craig, on Jimmy Dore, and it blew me away. It was shocking, surprising, and so I was like, I got to talk to this guy. I want to talk more with him about this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, when I went back to look for the interview you and Jimmy did, I couldn't find it. It's really not available. And so usually when I do a show, I can do prep. It's easy. I read up as much as I can on a guest. I watch some old interviews, kind of get a vibe for them. And I found that kind of difficult in this case. And the only thing I can gather is because of the subject matter. Jimmy Dore's show is very popular. It should be, as you know, I'm sure my nerds could Google it and find it, your interview, but it should have been something where I go, Jimmy Dore, Craig Jardula, election, boom, first thing that pops up. And instead, no, it's gone. Is that something that sounds familiar?
It sounds all too familiar. In fact, my outlet, the Convo Couch you mentioned, we started getting ourselves in trouble when we started diving into election years ago. And there was one point we were trying to get back our monetization. Now, we've been demonetized for over 5 years, I believe now.
Yeah.
We were trying to get it back, and they don't give you specifics because YouTube doesn't want to set a precedent because that's how they avoid getting sued. So they make their suspensions or their demonetizations very broad. You've violated the
community standards,
right? So yeah, so we knew exactly, we had not put a lot of our COVID stuff up on YouTube. We put the majority of that on Rockfin. Who knows what's happening with that platform nowadays? But we took down all our election videos off of YouTube, and they might be archived in Odyssey, some of them, and some of them are in Rockfin. But at the end of the day, it's just all too familiar, the fact that this is a subject that's very taboo. And a lot of people don't like my work out there because I come traditionally from the left, right? I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. In fact, it was the Bernie Sanders lawsuit with Jared and Elizabeth Beck. Still not back on X. Still haven't given their accounts back. That shows you Elon is really not about free speech. But it was that subject, that particular situation, which spun me into a world of election integrity. And I've been observing international elections in Latin America. I've observed 5 international general elections. I've spoken at the American Project, which is traditionally a conservative, right-wing populist Donald Trump group that speaks about election integrities. And I spoke on the solutions panels for 2 events for them, one in Orlando and one in West Palm Beach. But this is a subject, Mike and Garrett, that you don't want to venture into, even if you're speaking specifically about just the way everything is structured. If you don't play team sports and you just talk about the process itself, that can get you in a lot of trouble. So this tells you really all you need to know about election integrity. So as we go forward, Mike, just be careful, proceed with cautions, because it's the easiest way to put you in the penalty box.
I've noticed it. There used to be a day when I first started doing this that the things that would get you in trouble on YouTube or any of those platforms was if you, because I come from a morning show background. So we were ASCAP BMG, members, and you paid whatever for a radio station to be able to play music, and you'd add music beds to production all the time. And so a lot of us that come from radio, we're doing sort of that kind of thing. It's like, oh, here's something we're talking about. Let's throw a music bed underneath it. And YouTube would go, And I would always ask, well, I could listen to that fucking song on YouTube. Why do you get to, whatever. but that was about the extent of it. And so if they would yank your show or they demonetize it based on that, or they'd give you warnings like you've been shut down in this country because you don't have the permission to use this music. But then it got really weird a few years ago where it was like certain subjects, like those of us that were talking honestly and doing more research on COVID and asking questions, or the election in 2020, like those sort of things started getting you strikes and kicked out of the conversation. And, Jimmy Dore makes this point. I've made this point where it's like, the more they don't want you to talk about something, the more seriously they take that, the more you're over the target.
Yeah. Which would then make you lead you go to the next question. Why are certain people allowed to talk about certain things and others aren't? There are subjects when it comes to COVID that I can't talk about that Jimmy is allowed to talk about. So it's very interesting when it just shows you how deep this goes. You're right. Elections are one of those things that really, to tell you the truth, if you have problems always kind of getting your mind to believe in some of the conspiracy theories out there or the conspiracy truths, when you start looking at elections, you start saying, holy cow, this is really diabolical. This is really diabolical. How far does it go? What's really going on over there? And it really is a linchpin because, they sell us these ideas of freedoms and liberties that we have in the United States, right?
Right.
The freedom of speech, our number one amendment. This is what we're about. This is what we're based upon. But when you understand that sometimes elections can be selections, and then who's really controlling things, it really opens up Pandora's box, and it makes you question almost everything, which really is a threat to their control. When I say there, I mean the ruling class. Yeah,
it's unbelievable how much faith I had in all kinds of things, and it really does backfire in the end. Like if you even questioned a new vaccine technology, mRNA technology, if you even had questions like, or anything, it was so transparent, so easy if you were paying a little bit of attention to see through it, that they didn't want certain people saying stuff. They didn't want people to even have a platform, a voice. It was dangerous. And what that has in turn done is I go to the doctor now and they go, yeah, would you like a pneumonia vaccine? And I'm like, yeah, go fuck yourself. No. So where I had faith in like, oh, these people are just looking out for my best interests, now you're making me go, no, I don't know what you're up to, but that was so gross what you were doing before. And I fear election integrity is another one of those things where it's like, is the whole thing about to crumble from this perspective? I should start here because what is your background in this? How did you get started in looking at this stuff? Like, can you give us a brief synopsis of it?
So, I was in the restaurant business where I'm considering going back into right now with all the censorship and the deplatforming going on, because they're making it almost impossible to be an independent journalist. It's very hard to self-fund, and all the other networks are literally getting shut down. I don't know if you heard about TNT network, TNT radio.
No.
I've always kept my eyes and ears close to them. I've been a frequent guest on their shows. They've always had my information. I thought I might have found a home there one day talking about elections because they love to talk about elections. Well, it closed. So, I was in the restaurant business and I was part of the Bernie Sanders campaign, just volunteering and helping out. I met my business partner then, Fiorella Isabel.
She's great, by the way.
What's that?
She's great. I watched an interview you did with her on election integrity. It was spectacular.
She's awesome. And, her younger brother was also, once we were the threesome, we were just the three of us that would held the convo couch. And we decided to start it because we understood that, like, there was no mainstream media for these grassroots candidates to interview with. And that was when we were delusional and thinking that we were going to go into the Democratic Party and take it over all the Bernie Sanders followers. And we were going to change it, make it progressive, and they're going to work for us instead of us, pandering to them. And that didn't happen. But when we did start it, we started a small grassroots channel called the Convo Couch. And then we got involved in the Bernie Sanders case because our good friend Nico House was able to convince these particular lawyers to say, let's sue the DNC on behalf of the Bernie Sanders followers who donated monies that they didn't run a fair primary. So to understand how the primary was run, we had to understand every single aspect about elections. Shortly after, a bunch of election integrity activists started contacting us. And me in particular, I had certain mentors that took me under their wings to explain everything about elections, and they had been working on trying to get fair elections in the United States for quite some time. And they described it to me, one of my mentors, it's like a spider web. Once you catch on to one avenue in which they're cheating, they're going to be cheating in another avenue. They have different avenues in which they can cheat. So for me, my first question was the who. And the who is always the interesting part, because it seems to be that if you try to look at some of these companies that do the majority of our counting, our processing, our ballot printing, they're owned by private equity. In other words, you can't understand or know who the main characters are of the funding of these companies. Their information, just like their software, is proprietary. So it's been a lifelong quest of sorts to figure out where this is coming from, who's making these decisions. But when you understand what's exactly going on, it's not a partisan support. It's a establishment support on both sides of the aisle. What a lot of people don't want to realize and accept the fact is, in 2020, Joe Biden might have won, and I view those in air quotes, the top of the ticket, but the Republicans got the coattails. Well, how is that possible? There are people like the Mitch McConnells and the Lindsey Grahams and people on the left side, like the what's his name? The guy in New York.
Chuck Schumer.
Chuck Schumer. I can't even remember these people's names. The Maxine Waters. There are people who don't want you to know how these elections win, and they kind of use emotions and feelings to persuade people to stand behind a certain position on election integrity, which leads you down to even more of a fraudulent avenue. So this thing goes deep. It's how they maintain control. If you have a situation in which you can be nefarious, in which you think, when you make the population feel that the other side of the population has chosen this, that's very nefarious, because then you go along with it. Then you're just like, well, if this is what my fellow citizen has chosen, then I have to respect that. I mean, that's how deep and twisted this whole election system goes.
Well, I always felt, and it sucks, because I always felt there were certain things we agreed on. You know what I mean? Like this is settled. Like, sky is blue, grass is green, the moon is fake, 1 + 1 = 2. Like, you go down that road. And I assumed like that elections being fair and honest was one of those things. I just put that away. Now, did I think that, maybe there's some shenanigans here or there? Yeah. It's kind of like, I want the Lions to win every football game they're in, but, and I expect that maybe a quarterback's going to take 2 PSI off of football in a cold game to get better grip. Maybe a coach is going to try to snipe a signal here and there. But if I found out the refs were paid off to make sure that my team won every game, that's a whole different ball game than what we're talking about. And that's my fear, is that we're not finding out that, there was a little shenanigans and people are trying to get an edge wherever they can, but that you're losing your ability to trust in an institution like this.
Yeah, it makes you realize that your whole life marketing has been just a lie and a ploy. One of the business partners of the Convo Couch at the time, Johnny Tsunami, Fiorella's brother, who was our main engineer, he coined the phrase empire education. You just got to go back to what we were programmed and taught, how we were always taught that America, when they go around the globe, is like Captain America fighting for human rights. That's not always the case. Most of the cases are poor men fighting for a rich man's war for resources and other things. And once you learn those things, I mean, this is a big part of that linchpin. And it's a word I'm going to use with you guys today that you need to enact in your vocabulary and understand what it is, because it does really twist or give you a perspective of what's going on. It's called social engineers. There are social engineers who understand the way the minds work. And like you just mentioned, you would be upset if you thought the game was fixed itself. And Americans do have that mentality. A lot of people in 2020 feel that the game was rigged, and if the game was just fair, they would have a fair game, and that's what they want to go by,
right?
And that's what they want to stand by. The only problem is that the game has been, swayed the other way for their party before in the past, and nobody's even mentioned that. And there's been a very few of us who've said, hey, this isn't right. Those social engineers understand what confirmation bias is. Another word that you need to think is. Meaning that the people out there won't necessarily want to have a fair game. As long as you confirm their biases, they'll run with it. And in this particular case in 2020, people cared about the results more than the way that the process itself was run. And the social engineers know that, and they use it against us to pit each other against the people. It's all about divide and conquer still. It's just how they divide and conquer. And elections play a big part of that. into a big part of that, I should say.
Well, I think of, when people say like by any means necessary, I'm inclined now to believe them that outcome is the most important thing. And however we have to get there, we get there. We'll get into 2020 a little bit and some of the bigger details about this. But, it sounds almost like, and I don't know, I'll ask you, but the people in charge of elections and the process, which in turn the messaging behind it, are they trying their best to do good, or are they full of shit and putting their hands on the scale?
Well, once again, I would go to the justification that they have by any means necessary. You said, right?
Right.
So you can really convince a person that cheating is the way to go. Remember the Time magazine article, the cabal that saved democracy? Yeah. They pretty much admitted to cheating inside that article, and the ways out. What's the thing? The ways outweigh the means, or something, or whatever that saying is. That at the end of the day, if you convince people, and people really do, TDS is a thing. Same thing with CDS, COVID derangement syndrome. They were both a thing, and the social engineers knew that, and that people were willing to cheat to save democracy. Right. This is what we have to do. And so the social engineers understand that. So a lot of times people are cheating. They don't even realize that they're cheating. And how do you, when you convince people of certain things just based upon the surface level? In other words, if you convince people that asking for ID is racist, and not having Dropbox is racist because it's allowing people who normally don't get to vote, you know what I'm saying? And you use that white guilt against them, you can sway a lot of people's minds. So I think a lot of people some people at the top, they understand what's going on, but they'll justify it. And what's the difference as long as they think they're doing okay, then knowing that they're not doing okay, but you know what I'm saying over here. If they think that it's justified what they're doing, they're going to do it willingly. And that's what we have going on over here. Plus a lot of mass confusion too, as well.
Well, it's the old, if you could go back and kill Hitler as a baby, would you? Kind of thought. You know what I mean? Like if you could and so that's kind of the by any means necessary. Like when you're using terms like existential threat to democracy and stuff that's how you can get there, where people justify that stuff,
And that's a good thing you're saying, Mike, too, by the way, because if you go back and kill Hitler, does it stop it? Because Hitler was made by the West, right? Hitler had guys, he had puppet masters. So at the end of the day, you're not even addressing the problem. And that's the thing that's going on with elections right now. People can't even address the major problem, the elephant in the room. Everything is done on the surface level. Well, this is racist. Oh, this is not good. If we don't have extended time to vote, then that's not fair. What are you doing to black people? I mean, those are the arguments that are coming into play. And for some reason, people can only look on the surface. That's why going to see elections in Latin America, when you see an actual legit election run in front of you, it's something special. It really changes your whole perspective. And I think that's always given me hope.
Well, what does that mean? Because I know, I'll see Steven Crowder is going to have an election thing. We're going to have boots on the ground. I know, have gone to elections around the world. I don't know what that means, though, as far as access to being able to see things in real time, how important that is. Like, what does that work look like?
Well, first of all, what Steven Crowder is selling you a fake bill of goods, because they have proprietary software counting the ballots in the majority of those areas. The majority, 90% of the votes in America are counted by proprietary software, somewhere close to 95%. The 6 areas in which Donald Trump lost in the still of the night, those areas are counted by proprietary software. Also, ballot harvesting is legally in those places, so people can legally bring in multiple ballots. I mean, there's no way to really doing this because the system itself is not fair. And most of those national systems that I witnessed, for instance, let's talk about my 3 favorites. We'll talk about my 2 favorites. What about my 3 favorites? Okay. It's Nicaragua, Honduras, and Colombia. Let's talk about those 3 ways.
Venezuela's not one of them?
What's that?
I'm
going to use them all because there's little differences there. And then there's areas of criticisms which we can kind of compare to what we're witnessing so we can get a clear view of what's going on. Because there are issues in which these countries do have. I would say Nicaragua is the best. But there is areas like in Honduras, when you go to check in at your polling place, you have to go to your party's tent first. And they're allowed to serve you food and whatnot. And for poor people, you can buy votes. Well, hey, come over here and vote with us in our party. We'll give you some pupusas, some sandwiches. I mean,
we've got better food.
There's areas in which, and it's important to point out those areas because the Democrats in Georgia have used areas like that to try to go against, to try to kind of misspell or set up a false narrative, a false dichotomy. Oh, you're not allowed to give people water in line.
Yeah.
No, election officials are allowed to give people water in line. That's okay. Parties are not allowed to buy votes by swaying people with food because they do it a lot. Like the Democratic Party is known in California for their delegations of showing up, getting old people, taking them for breakfast, telling them who to vote for, and then busting them in for a vote. That's what you cannot do, and that's the misconception over here. So that's why it's important to point out the weak areas. When I go to these other countries, I scrutinize these elections. But all things are done. The majority of these countries I talked about, Mike and Garrett, it's done in the purview of the public. In other words, people must have ID. They must go to their designated polling spot on election day, which is a Sunday. Once they do vote and they show up and vote, they get ink on their finger so they cannot vote again. And then all those votes are taken out in front of the public and counted by hand in front of the person. And all the results are posted on each door of each election room, of each election spot in the country, all done the same way. It's a national vote. Also, they're only voting for one position on that day, president. There are a lot of things they do in America to very confuse and clout, especially when it comes to the push for public counting. They have multiple positions that you vote for. You got to vote for assistant dog catcher of the city district that you don't even know anything about, judges you never even heard a decision on. I mean, you got to take a course to make sure that you can go show up and vote with a strong conscious head. These are done on purpose so they can keep the election system where it's at in their hands, but out of the purview of the public.
Wouldn't the argument be, because that sounds like on its face great. Yeah, we just vote for president, vice president, that's it. But if you put 100 people no one's ever heard of all over the ballots and did it on a separate Tuesday, no one would show up, and then 50 people would be able to swing an election because no one would show up.
Well, first off, you don't do it on a Tuesday. You do it on a Sunday. Like in all those countries I mentioned, it's a national holiday. All those countries I mentioned too, Mike, you got to have a national ID of sorts. You know what I'm saying? You have to have an identification.
That's racist, though, right? Isn't that racist?
Well, that's what they want to tell you, and they want you to make you think it's stupid that people can't get an ID. Like, really, let me exploit black people by making it seem like they can't get IDs, and I'm going to use that as I'm being a white knight on TV and saying this is why I'm standing by this way of voting. Yeah. It's insulting to me. You know what I'm saying? And that's something they asked me. My guide asked me in Nicaragua. He goes, they don't let you vote in California without ID. And I'm like, yeah, they let you vote in California without ID. He goes, why did they do that? Because they said they think it's hard to get an ID. And this is a country where in a spot where it's dirt roads. I wasn't in Managua for their election. I was in the Pacific coast, the Caribbean coast. I was in Bilwi. I went to the other side of the country. They have dirt roads there. He goes, why don't they just make it easier to get an ID? Well, they want to make sure that this stuff was in control because they don't want other people voting. And they do keep it very confusing. And they don't, you know what I'm saying? Having a county by county system is also going to just clout the whole confusion. And that's in our Constitution. So, I mean, to change our election system, we're going to have to change our Constitution. There's so much work to be done, but we're moving further away from transparency and a fair election, not moving closer towards it.
Well, you're going to disenfranchise hundreds of millions of people at this pace. Like, if people don't have trust in that, because you'll remember too, Craig, I don't need to tell you, but it was obvious to those of us that were paying attention and doing talk shows every day. Like, you either exclaimed this was the freest and fairest election ever, like that phrase specifically. We joked about it at the time, like, ugh, this is gross that they're forcing us to say this, or you're some tinfoil hat conspiracy whack.
The big lie. The big lie.
The big lie. Yeah, that was another one.
Big lie.
Yeah.
Which, I would think the big lie was in the beginning was if you take the boop boop, which is the doop doop doop, that it won't transmit. You won't transmit the that was the biggest lie ever, because they came back and admitted it and stuff. But no, I mean, it is disgusting. And the crazy thing about it is a lot of those Democrats were people who were complaining about the system when they had lost it. Their party had lost it. I think some of them need to talk to their little masters and figure out what's going on and get with the program, because they've they missed a lot of things over there.
Yeah. So do you think, we hear here and, the press will tell you, oh yeah, America, freest and fairest elections ever around the world. It's it's a mess. Venezuela, who knows? North Korea, Russia, I guess is different. But do you, it almost sounds like you have more confidence in the elections going on around the world in some of these
Venezuela, you talked about it. It's a DRE system, which is a direct recording electronic device. It's like a cash register machine, but they audit in front of the people 54% of the ballots. So they take out those ballots, they open up those boxes, and they count to make sure it matches up. It would be really hard to cheat that system, and it can be caught in real time. And any of those Trump people who are telling you that they wouldn't take Venezuela's election process over ours is lying every single day of the week and twice on Sundays. Yes.
Yeah.
And really, to tell you the truth, the biggest factor for a lot of these leftists that are winning in Latin America in these free elections is the United States getting involved. They are their biggest supporters because they say, look at the United States. They're coming in here. They're stealing our resources. They want to control who your government is. We are pushing back against that. And that's how they garner a lot of votes, is because the Americans are getting involved. And that's something that's not talked about that leads to our migration process. You want to know why there's so much migration? Well, those multinational corporations that are screwing us here in the United States, they also exist in Latin America, and they're stealing the resources over there. They're destabilizing those countries as much as possible so they can extract those resources for pennies on the dollar, and then people show up on our doorstep following their stuff here, hoping for some trickle down. And that's what's going on. They don't talk about that. Donald Trump won't talk about that. Neither party will talk about that. And, that's when you get to see the whole picture and how elections tie into all this theater that's being played in front of us, while the elites and the ruling class control everything from the resources to the media we watch to the TV we watch. Everything is being controlled right now. And all we're witnessing is kabuki theater.
Yeah. It's terrifying. Now, one of the arguments I hear on the right is that there's 20 million illegals in your country, and the point is to get them to be able to vote in your elections. Is that a concern? Do you think that's the plan, if you will, or is that bullshit?
No, it's not the plan. It's part of the plan. It's there. First of all, illegal immigrants or undocumented workers, however you want to refer to them, do not vote in mass. I've lived in California for many years of my life. I worked in the restaurant business. I've had many employees that were from Latin America, right? It's a sanctuary city. They do not vote in mass. And whether regardless of not of what Donald Trump tells you, and he tries to compare the mass migration to the Muriel boat ride of Cuba, when supposedly Castro opened up his prisons and he opened up his asylum, insane asylum, and said, get on a boat and get out of here. The movie Scarface was made. It was in the beginning of the movie. If you want to see that and be entertained, that's what they're referring to. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to kind of draw this comparison to, especially since he comes from South Florida and he knows a lot of those anti-Cuban government, Cubans and Venezuelans. They live down in that area and he knows them. But he also knows better. It's the majority of the people who do come up are just workers, and they stay out of trouble, and they understand it's still illegal to vote in the general election, and they don't want to put themselves in trouble, so they don't vote. But this is what I talked about on the Jimmy Dore show, and they don't. Unfortunately, the Republicans are caught in this phase that they feel if they don't talk strongly against migration and why so many people are here, that they'll lose votes. They're tapping into the xenophobia of America, and America does have this strong xenophobic mentality. I don't know why. They are made to believe that their resources are limited and the immigrants coming in, and you have to choose between a veteran and an immigrant for services. That's just not the case. The reason why they're allowed to come in here so many times, and a lot of people don't understand this right now, I bet you didn't know that the State Department and our government has offered work visas to citizens of Nicaragua. A lot of people don't know that, but they're trying.
I knew that about Haiti.
Haiti's one. Venezuelans, another one. But Venezuelans, it's only a certain one. Donald Trump wouldn't grant the work visas to Carlos Vecchia's people. In other words, the Venezuelans that are here, the majority of them were in Colombia and other countries. They weren't even in Venezuela. They were the anti-Maduro, anti-Chavistas Venezuelans, a lot of them in the gangs, funded by the CIA to terrorize the people, to try to get the government to be overthrown by their own people. That's the whole idea of sanctions and what the CIA has been doing down there for many years. This is the freeway Rick Ross, the Iran-Contra story. It's what the United States does. We've been doing this. We have never stopped. The cartels are run by the CIA. Okay. So those people that are here are the ones that are the anti-Maduro government that Donald Trump wouldn't give them work visas. Joe Biden has said, okay. So that's who we've allowed in. The Haitians that are here are because what we've been doing. I mean, we've cooed that
Raped
government
Haiti. Yeah.
so many times. Yes. Jean Bertrand Aristide was cooed twice as he was considered the servant of the people. And they cooed him twice because the United States wanted to make sure they get all those resources. Right now, Western corporations are in Haiti, in the mountains, extracting a mineral called iridium. There's more iridium in Haiti than in any country in the world. Supposedly, a meteor hit in one of those mountains years and years and years ago, and that's where they're extracting it. So the game is to do what they normally do. Destabilize the country, extract the resources for pennies on the dollar, and then bring them on over to here where we can use them. Same thing that's been doing in the Congo for a year with the cobalt. You know what I'm saying? We keep these countries destabilized. That's the game. That's why these people show up on our doorstep. Now, that's one of the reasons why people can get in here and stuff. And the ruling class is going to exploit that because they're paying them slave wages, you know, to pick our fruit, to clean our pools, to cut our lawns. You know what I'm saying? All the jobs that if Donald Trump deports 5 million immigrants tomorrow, we're going to come out there and say, ding dong, the witch is dead. Now we can do that work again. It's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah.
But they can also be exploited for a ballot in these big areas, Mike and Garrett. I will talk about Clark County, Nevada, where I lived last election 2 years ago. Automatic registration for a mail-in ballot once you renew your driver's license or get a new driver's license. They've made it no secret in areas like California, New York, Arizona, Nevada, that they're going to allow undocumented workers or illegal immigrants, whatever you call them, to have driver's license. They have to take a test. They got to be on the road. Well, now they generate a ballot for that migrant who came in and got a driver's license or renewed their driver's license. That migrant, 90% of the times, doesn't even touch the ballot. They either try to return to sender or it ends up in the hands of somebody who's selling them and grabbing them, which those people are all over the place, and they can legally be voted on and taken in by ballot harvesting in Clark County. Even though they put the ballot box, the what do you call the drop boxes? They put them back inside the polling places. They have vote centers, so you don't have to go to a designated voting spot. You can go wherever you want, and those ballots can be taken in. So the illegal immigrant is not voting. The illegal immigrant, though, is being exploited for a ballot, and somebody establishment-like is turning those ballots in.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this much. Yeah. Immigrants just don't vote in mass. They don't do it.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Why would they? It seems like, for the most part, they're trying to stay off the radar, not beyond the radar. You know what I mean? Like, they're aware.
They can get them deported tomorrow. They're not doing that.
Yeah.
They're not doing that.
Yeah.
But with this is what I'm saying. People understand this mass mail-out ballots. It's not just about mail-out ballots. It's making it mass, shotgunning to everybody on the voter rolls. In Kerry Lake's election, 90% of the people who were on the voter rolls in Maricopa County got a ballot a month before the election. Like 1.8 million ballots were mailed out. Well, only 0.8 of those million were turned in. Where's the other million ballots? They're just out there floating around. It's the system that's the fraud, not the fraudsters within the system. You can't have an election like that.
So what happens to those? Is the point that a small fraction of those are harvested, are collected, and then turned in, and now you've got no chain of custody? And we're seeing in battleground states, these things can come down to tens of thousands of votes to swing elections. Is that the point? I
wouldn't use the term small. I would use an ample amount could be turned in. Let's not forget what happened in 2020. Right now, I was with Fiorella. We were in Las Vegas. We were doing a production. We were covering the election. We actually had a crew. We rented out an Airbnb, so we had a nice big space. We were having guests all day. We were following this election closely, and we were pretty much calling it. The numbers, it would have been mathematically impossible for Donald Trump to lose this election in these 6 areas. But in the still of the night, here come these ballots. They come harvested in, and they come just rolling on in, and it turns the election upside down. And here's the thing. A lot of those laws were made temporary because of the COVID-19, because you had to vote safely. Well, in the situation where they won in those areas, they have now made those laws permanent. So those laws are permanent in Arizona. They're permanent in Nevada. They're permanent in Wisconsin. They're permanent.
It was weird. Again, I am a person that, hey, if my team has a message this time around that wins voters over, I'm cool with that. If the other team has a better message, and they get to their, fine. If the American public decides, hey, we're going left, we're going right, we're going whatever, I'm fine with that. Something about that 2020 election got really fucking weird at like 1:00 in the morning. You saw it all over the country, and it was and then you weren't allowed to talk about it. But I don't know what happened. Is there anything in place to make, like, it just seemed like when I was growing up, Craig, you voted and you found out that night who won, and everybody either celebrated or cried. That's just the way it was. This was just fucking weird. The way things went down, where it looked like, if you're being honest about it, it looked like a landslide is what it looked like. It looked like a Reagan-esque landslide in one way. And then you woke up the next morning and went, wait a minute, what? And people that are like hardcore left, been left their whole lives, went, oh, that's just when they counted the mail-in ballots. That's all that was.
Yeah, and then you can ask them, why did they cancel mail-in ballots in France, in Mexico? Why don't they have it in all these European countries? Why did all these countries get rid of it? Then you can ask them in a bipartisan convention in 2004, I believe it was, with James Baker, a Republican, and Jimmy Carter, a Democrat. They got together in a room to discuss elections, and they both came out and said the area most ripe for fraud, without a doubt, is the mail-in process. There's a reason why they got rid of these mail-in ballots a long time ago. And you can have a limited amount of mail-ins for those who really need it.
Sure.
And necessary, but they broke the system on purpose. They would make you wait 4 or 5 hours to vote so they can sell you this mail-in process. This is all done by design. And what they're doing by design now is, when we talked about that illegal immigrant thing, this is something that Catherine Austin Fitts talked about. They're trying to move you on to digital IDs. The way they're going to sell you that to stop the immigrants from voting and blame the immigrants, because that's all Donald Trump does now, is blame the immigrant for everything. I mean, there was a volcano that erupted. I heard Donald Trump said the Haitians, they're eating the cats and dogs, and they blew up the volcano. I mean, it's
so counter to his message. It's so counter to his message. It just drives me nuts. Because he
doesn't even mention the ruling class or the donor class anymore. In 2016, he goes, "That's all their donors over there, Mike. You hear them? That's the donors over there. They don't want me." And they lied about Iraq. I mean, where's that Donald Trump?
That is a good Trump.
Completely gone. But really quickly, they want to move you to digital IDs. That's how they're going to sell it to you. Catherine Austin Fitts, who does a lot of shows with Whitney Webb, talks about, I'm throwing out these names because these are big names out there. They talk about it all the time. They're going to give you the fear that it's an ID problem, and they're going to try to move you to on the grid with digital IDs to stop the immigrant from voting. And that's another part that Donald Trump is trying to sell you, which is terrible. They should have eliminated, they should have made a big push to eliminate, and they should have had the House, the Republicans, pass no more ballot harvesting. This is a bill that Tulsi Gabbard brought up. It's very important. No more ballot harvesting. Start with that. If you've done that, and then you leave it to the Senate, and the Senate says no way, now you're going to put the whole Senate on display in front of the country, and we could have been having this conversation for quite some time. They should have also eliminated, then the second thing, proprietary software. Any software that counts our vote cannot be black box voting. In other words, it can't be proprietary, owned by some other company, when it's we, the people, who are voting and we want to see the votes. Voting is a private thing. Counting is a public thing. And this is the way they should have attacked this. They didn't. Instead, they blamed immigrants, and they started looking at voting lists. They started chasing their own tail to make sure there's no illegal ballots going out, right?
Yeah.
They started going after voter lists and trying to clean them. No, eliminate the whole system so you don't have these voter lists. Get it back to one person, one day, one vote, in person. And once you do that, you got a shot. And if they can do it in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, and in freaking Honduras, they can do it here. It's the biggest scam they're trying to sell us. Sorry, that's a lot.
No. It's great. It's great. It's informative. And, you've mentioned ballot harvesting. I know there's something else called clustering. For people that don't follow this stuff, aren't aware of what that means, I sort of know what ballot harvesting is. You go into an old folks home and I'm just collecting the ballots because these people can't get down to the voting side. Like, that's what they would tell you is going on. And it sounds great on its face. You're helping out someone that can't help themselves necessarily. But my guess is that's not exactly what's going on. And I'm not terribly familiar with clustering. I heard you mention that term in an interview. Maybe you could explain what some of that is.
Well, you've done your homework, son.
I'm trying, man.
I was about to give you the line in Snatch when the lead gangster says, "Take your tongue out of my ass," right? He says, like, he's just mentioned ballot clustering. Well, that's the term Bill Benny had used. Bill Benny was one of the, I would say, whistleblowers. He used to work, I think he used to work for, I can't remember which intelligence apparatus he used to work for, but he had talked about when they had tried to sell us the whole hack, the DNC hacking with the Russians by the Russians, and they're like, it was impossible. Bill Benny is the one who said it was impossible for the Russians to do that. It had to be done internally. In other words, they had to have a whistleblower. Somebody had to go into the internal drive, put a disk in that or a thingy into it, extract that information, take that out, and then drop it. Like Bill Benny was one of the person. And I believe he was working on Panquake for a while, which was supposed to be an alternative to Twitter. I don't know what happened with that. But Bill Benny had talked about ballot clustering, and he had given the term. And that's when you pretty much, it's the same, essentially, ballot stuffing, but you're doing it in a Dropbox type of way where you're taking in loads of ballots that are legal and putting them into the Dropbox list. You're clustering and you're putting them through the machine. I mean, there's other ways to get them into. You don't even take them to the ballot box. There is no chain of custody from where the vote is cast to where it's counted in all these areas, like
Crazy.
Detroit, like Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay,
so Craig, hold on just a second.
That guy who's supposedly taking the ballots to be counted, he can stop anywhere, do anything, grab any votes, and then they can cluster. They can load up the machine to get a ballot counted for one candidate over the other. That's what
there was. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I was in Detroit at the time, and I remember stories briefly, and then they were kind of disappeared, and you were told you were crazy if you wanted to talk about it further. But it appeared like there was something going on, weird times. All of a sudden, there's someone with a wheelbarrow with a bunch of shit, and they're just throwing them in the box. Or you'd see it a drop box, and someone would pull up in a van, and they'd have a case of something, and they'd throw it in a box. And it was like, is that what you're talking about? And was that bullshit? Because I know they tried to dismiss that story, but I don't know what that was.
Well, clustering is the time when before they get into the machine to be counted. So however those ballots, those mail-in ballots or other just ballots that's the thing. You don't even, the mail-in ballot, there's no chain of custody. I call them mail-in ballots, right? There's also, I call them mail-out ballots because the time in which they are mailed to you from the ballot printer to you, there's no chain of custody there. How do we know when it comes to mail-in ballots that they're not printing extra ballots and giving them to somebody nefarious to turn in? And at the end of the day, the person, whether it be the Secretary of State, for instance, I'll use California as an example. Alex Padilla was the Secretary of State. He signs the contract with K&H, which is the ballot printer. That ballot printer now works for Alex Padilla because he signed the contract over and gave him money. So what's to stop that ballot printer from making sure that he gets extra ballots right from the ballot printing shop into somebody's hand that gets it right into the counting machine? Skip the whole process of being mailed out or whatever. There's nothing to stop that. That's why when you go to Honduras and you go to Nicaragua and you go to Colombia, the chain of custody starts at the door. There's 400 ballots on the table. They call it a mesa. At the end of the day, if there's 150 votes, there needs to be 250 ballots left over. And that's all done in the purview of the people. That's not the case with us, Mike and Garrett, right now. The ballot making company, which is also, listen to this, private equity. You don't know who owns them either. Same thing once again, right?
Yeah.
What's to stop them from printing off ballots that eventually could be clustered into the machine and tip the scale for one candidate over the other, say in the middle of the night like we saw in 2020? Nothing. There's no chain of custody.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, where I was in Michigan, it was a small suburb of Detroit, which most of it is for, I lived in a small county, and it was down at the end of the block. I would go in, give them my ID. They would look at a map of my little town and they'd go, you vote on this side. People that maybe are a street or two over vote on this side. And I was in and out in 3 minutes. I, got to fill it out. I was gone. It was harmless, easy, quick. It seemed like they knew exactly who I was. They were able to look at my ID, look at my address. They knew where I was supposed to be. Done. And then you hear stories out of Atlanta. It always comes to mind. Atlanta seems like an absolute shit show. And I don't blame people if they go, this is crazy. I don't have 7 hours in the middle of the day to wait in line. Is that something where people are going out of their way to disenfranchise people? Is it ineptitude? What is going on in those situations?
Well, like I said earlier in the show, they broke the system to move you into mail-in ballots. Why should it take you 4 or 5 hours? In Colombia and Bogota, for instance, they would have mesas. That's what they called the table where you would vote. You'd have an assigned mesa, and you had to go to that table. At that table, all the parties were present. They were standing there. They double-checked your IDs. So I went to one of the biggest centers in Bogota to make sure. And what we would always do, too, Mike and Garrett, was we would take our phone and take our stopwatch, and we would time how long does it take somebody to vote in this country, in that country, in this city, in that city. And it was really important because expediency is part of the whole process. If it takes you 4 or 5 hours to vote, but then somebody says, well, hey, why would you wait 4 or 5 hours to vote next time when you can just get a mail-in ballot and mail it off yourself? Absolutely. That is done by design. In Bogota, one of the biggest areas, they would have you go to the spot, and you look up on the list where your table is. They tell you which room, which area you'd go. You go to that table. You make your vote. You put your thumbprint on there. You put it in front of the ballot box, in front of the public, and you'd get it done. It was expedient on purpose. And a lot of places, like those small towns that you vote in, still have those systems in play. It is the bigger cities in which they've targeted to say, well, what are we going to do when we have 500,000 people voting? Mike lived in a town of 65 people. Of course, it takes 1, 2, 3 to vote. In a town with 65,000 people, we got to get computers. We got to make vote centers. We got to do all these things which make it impossible for transparency and possible to audit a vote, because that's what a vote center does. It makes sure that you can't vote in a certain spot. There were people in Nicaragua that we met that have been voting in the same spot for the last 10 elections. And that's by, the way it's supposed to be.
That's how my town was.
They don't do that anymore. They've clouded the situation, and they've sold you expediency to go along with it. And it's just a big lie. They fooled you. They duped you. And that's what they're doing. They're duping the American people.
Yeah. So if we talk about the 2020 election, we know things changed for COVID, and, that was bullshit on its face. But, I understand why the public bought into that. I believe something like 70% of ballots for that was mail-in.
Yep.
And now there's a real push to make sure it's still that way. And my gut tells me there's reasons that they don't want you to go back to the more accountable ways of doing it. That's my guess.
I would say that as a person who's been looking at this for quite some time, studying these things, this is my top of my chain for issues. I've talked to election integrity activists over the years, whether it be somebody who is a mail-in expert, accounting expert, every single expert in this field I've tried to talk to over the last 7 years. I would say 100%, Mr. Walters, that you were right on par with what your gut is telling you.
Yeah.
And you have to also wonder, I've said this before about 2020. Joe Biden won the top of the ticket, but the coattails went to the Republicans. Very odd, really not mathematically possible. I mean, they sold you that and stuff, but you got to wonder why. And you got to wonder why we haven't had the serious reforms we've needed to, why they have not had a push to eliminate ballot harvesting, while ballot harvesting is still legal in 27 states. At the very least, the Trump people should have highlighted that more than anything. Get rid of ballot harvesting altogether, and you would really go a long way in starting to start the healing process. But the Democrats and the establishment have sold you. You got to vote safely, and beware right now of monkeypox. I just caught the HHA secretary in Chicago, and they're selling you monkeypox. So be careful of late September, early October surprises. Oh, we got to go back to mail-in ballots, mass, even more because monkeypox is going to get you. Be careful.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know.
I thought they were going with bird flu this time.
I think they went with wait, you can't say monkeypox because it's basic. So we've been calling it crackerpox.
It's mpox.
Mpox. Crackerpox is what I like.
So sticking with the 2020, afterwards, there was a big dust up, and, there's been all kinds of court cases, and I'll just read you some of them, and I'd love your opinion on it. A lot of people point to, I could never vote for Donald Trump because he tried to steal an election. He sent fake electorates in, and because of that, he's a threat to democracy. Do you know what that's about? I've heard, depending on who you're listening to, which makes it really hard for the general public to parse through this stuff. What's true, what's not, who's playing. Depending on which side of the aisle they're on, they're going to weaponize it. What is the story behind the fake electorates, and was that nefarious, legal? Was it a desperate move?
I think we just had an unprecedented situation where we had Donald Trump, appear to be fighting for the will of the people and asking for, I think Georgia would probably be your best example, when he asked the Secretary of State to go back and, not legitimize the election, go back and ask for a recount, do something. A lot of people looked at that because we had never seen those areas before. There were people who wanted Al Gore to push for that, and he didn't. There were people who wanted John Kerry to push for that, and he didn't. To find a way to fight to make sure that the will of people, their vote stood. Now, when it comes to the judges, I will tell you this more than anything, because way before 2020, Mike and Garrett, we've had election cases thrown out all the time. In fact, the Bernie Sanders case, which had nothing to do with Bernie Sanders, had everything to do with his followers that were calling out the DNC for an illegitimate election primary, in which they pretty much admitted. They said they can go into the back room full of cigar smoke and pick whoever they want. This was said by Bruce Spiva, who was a Democratic lawyer.
I was going to ask you about that. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm looking through my notes because
it's okay.
There's so much coming here. You talking about Jared Beck?
Yeah, Jared and Elizabeth Beck, who are still not on Twitter right now. Ask Elon Musk that why.
What is the story of that? Because it seemed to rile you up a little bit. This is 2016.
Yeah, well, that was the case that put me where I'm at today. That's why I'm talking to you today about elections, because of that particular case. The Democratic Party admitted, and this is not Bernie Sanders who brought the lawsuit. It was followers who donated to Bernie Sanders, were suing the Democratic Party for throwing an illegitimate primary process. So with that being said, the lawyers, Jared and his wife, Elizabeth Beck, had to get all the weapons, understand how elections work, and prove that it was fraudulent. And as they were proving that it was fraudulent, the Democratic Party said, well, listen, technically there's no such thing as a Democrat. We're a corporation. We can go into the back room full of cigar smoke and pick whoever we want, technically. And meaning that the Democratic Party did not have to throw a democratic process. And that's what really set me off. But here's the thing I learned and understood about that, because then I started looking back at other cases and cases that are taking place to this day. No judge is going to delegitimize a system that put him into power. You understand? So that is one of the big things to understand. They have the luxury of saying, okay, we got to kick this back down to the state, and the state's got to figure that out. It's in our Constitution. They run the election a certain way. They have to come up with a certain process. We cannot get involved. They can use that as an excuse, but no judge is going to delegitimize a system that put them into power. And that's something that people have to understand, because this is going on way before 2020, way before 2016. So with that being said, that particular situation in which, and this is where Bernie Sanders right then and there could have planted his flag and said, okay, I'm leaving the Democratic Party for good. I'm going to run under the Green Party's ticket. I will run as Jill Stein as my vice president. I'm going to do this. Enough is enough. If they're not going to respect the will of the people, we're going to go out and we're going to get out of this party and do what we need to do. Instead, he completely capitulated, bent the knee, got in line, and then shepherded a lot of people into the Democratic Party, which is, you can argue, was he meant to do that or not? But that particular case, the Democratic Party admitted that they don't have to throw a democratic process.
Yeah. So is that where it comes down to, like, because a lot of people will tell me, hey, 63 courts threw this out or said that there was nothing wrong. 63 courts, 64 courts and judges said that.
Yeah. Well, you could say hundreds of judges have been throwing out lawsuits when it comes to election integrity for years, way before that. And what judge is going to delegitimize a system that put him into power? They're not going to do that. By him legitimizing that particular lawsuit, he's saying that the position he is holding himself
is fraudulent,
could possibly not be legitimate, right? I mean, that's what he's saying. So a lot of these people, especially judges, they want the status quo. They want to keep the system in play. They were either, appointed by a Democrat or a Republican 9 times out of 10, and therefore they're going to be loyal to the party, not the system. And that's why they do that. They throw that. That doesn't mean anything. And you can tell people they've been throwing away these court cases, hundreds of court cases way before 2020. They never take these cases. They never do it. They don't touch it.
So they don't even review it, look at it, they just dismiss it on standing. Is that the thought?
That is most of notwithstanding. You hit it on the nose. That's a saying that we get used to all the time. In other words, you have to have a victim in this situation, right? And if you don't have a legal victim, right, that there's no such thing. It's a corporate party, the Democratic Party. So nobody can really ever be hurt because it's the corporation that essentially makes the decision, not the voter himself. The voter has just been duped into thinking that they're part of a process that they're really not entitled to. And it says that in their corporation structure. So that's what you think. And they admitted that in court. They said there's no such thing as a Democrat.
Wouldn't you think the American public would count as a victim if that was the case, like as a whole? I know that's not an individual, but if it's not the will of the people being represented,
I mean that answer is simple. I believe that 100% we are all the victim of what's going on. But a lot of people have to understand that those judges got into those positions by being loyal to their parties or their masters, and that's where they're at. They're not going to move on it. And it once again, when you start looking at elections, Mike and Garrett, you start realizing the whole picture of control. You know, I talk about this all the time. The COVID-19 was more than just a virus or a vaccine. It's about control. It's about rearranging society for QR codes to say, if you don't do this, you can't have this. That's what mandates were about. That's what this system is about. It's about control. They sell you the illusion of a democracy. They sell you the illusion of freedom. It's all an illusion. We're in a controlled system. We are essentially in the Matrix, but we just don't notice it yet.
Yeah. And the shitty part too is if you even question it, you're the problem. You hate your neighbors. You hate your country.
By design.
Yeah. It's really awful to see like that. Going back to Arizona really quick. And I appreciate all the time, Craig. I really do. I think people will hopefully
one of
listen.
the most fun interviews I've had in a long time. Please go.
Good. When I talk to people here, because I recently moved to Maricopa County. I'm in Scottsdale. I've been in, Metro Detroit my entire life. And, this is anecdotal as it may be, but you drive around here, it looks like Trump country. I don't know how else to say it. The cars, the flags on houses, the fucking stands and corners. I never saw this in Detroit, by the way. Here, every other corner has a fucking stand with pro-Trump.
It's here in Detroit.
Is it in Detroit too?
Yeah.
It's crazy. There's people driving. You're on the main road. You'll see some guy in a golf cart with a giant Trump flag. And that's how it was in 2016 too. And then they called that state, Fox News did, at 20% night of the election. It seemed weird. I know it's anecdotal and maybe those people are just more rabid. And then I talked to liberals here that are family, friends. They don't want to discuss it. They go, there were 3 full audits done in Maricopa County, hand recounts 3 times. That's proof nothing was wrong. And it was Republican led, Craig. What could possibly be nefarious with that?
Well, first of all, they're full of shit because there wasn't any real audits. And then a recount is different than an audit. An audit is going to say, where did the vote come from? How did it get there? Is it a legit vote? A recount is just recounting the votes that are already cast. Yeah. And like we explained with the system, it came to the mail-in ballots, how fraudulent it could be and how easy it is to stuff and cluster the ballot box. So that's part of the problem right there. When it comes to Maricopa County, I can't even remember right now. And I've lived in Scottsdale. I worked for the IPIC for a little bit. I was out there for quite some time. I covered the recount that was out there, and the only job was to recount the ballots. They couldn't determine where that ballot came from. The way they did that audit was not an audit. It was a recount, and really wasn't done in a proper way. The things they were looking for, once again, was a big distraction. The way they did it. I covered the audit on YouTube. I just covered the hearing. And they gave me a strike for that show and took it down. Just think about that. But I wasn't even I was like, this is what happened today. Let me explain to you. This is what Dr. Shiva was talking about. And this whole situation, I can't even remember. I'm trying to right now. And I really am trying to remember the governor's name there.
The governor in
Arizona. The one who won the election versus Kari Lake.
Yeah.
And Kari Lake could have been more popular than Donald Trump, if not as popular in Arizona. Yeah. The way she ran her campaign. I can't even remember the person's name. And she was the Secretary of State in 2020
She
that
wasn't-
oversaw the election, you know?
Yeah.
Mark Fincham was running for Secretary of State. I still speak to Mark Fincham on a regular basis, and that's the beautiful thing about Mark Fincham. He knows that we think totally different ideological, but he'll still let me come into his office, sit down. He'll listen to ideas. He will try to understand the election system. We'll talk about it all the time. He ran for Secretary of State, and that election was just ridiculous. It is not a fair election. In Arizona, I would just simply say, in the Kerry Lake election, ask why there were so many ballots just floating out there. Why did 80% of Maricopa County get a ballot a month before the election? You know what I'm saying? You cannot have an election. When you have an election where 75% of it is mail-in ballots, it's automatically fraudulent. You don't know where these ballots are coming from, how they're turned in, whatnot. We need to get less than 5% of mail-in ballots turned in. And even at 5%, that's ridiculous. But that's what they're selling you, a fake bill of goods that you can't get this done. And when you see it be done in a Latin American country, you're like, we can do this easily. We can get the results that night. Arizona is a perfect example. You ask how many people out there, Mr. Walters, that you say, hey, you tell them to sign up to be a poll worker, they'll never get a call back. They won't do it. You know why? Because budgeted in the money, these counties, they can hire outside groups to come in and help count their ballots. It's another money laundering scheme there too, as well, that the HAVA Act also brought in. They don't want the citizens participating because they don't want people who have any stake in the game counting their stuff, because then they can manipulate whatever they want. So when people start telling you that Arizona has a fair system, you can tell them they're sniffing glue. Did you watch those hearings? You got one person who's in charge of mail-in ballots before the election, one person whose department's in charge of day of ballots of in the precincts that come out of the drop boxes, another person who's in charge of counting the mail-in ballots that come in after the election. They have it so confusing over there on purpose so they can manipulate and break the system. Arizona does not have a fair system whatsoever, and anybody who's telling you that is full of it.
I think they're just, first off, it's not a super sexy subject historically. So a lot of people, don't pay that much attention. I think people assume that leaders are doing what's best for their citizens. And it really does suck to see it torn down. My brother loves mail-in ballot voting. He tells me Arizona's locked in on this. They've got this down. They do signature verification, and if that signature doesn't match, that gets set aside and it's counted and gone through.
Where is he telling you that from? Ask him where. Okay, signature verification. I can tell you, Whitney Webb did some great stories on this. I think it's called Parasite is one of the companies in California when I witnessed this myself, right?
Yeah.
So the ballots are now taken out of the envelope. The envelope's put aside. So now that the signature on the ballot is taken off the side, right? They'll run those signatures through a machine. There's something called, I believe it's called a tetherance level. A level, in other words, about how much it has to be legit to match up to be okayed, right? And you can lower that level down very, very small. So a scribble will match your signature and it will go on through. So when your brother is repeating these things, he's just repeating something he told him. Tell him to go witness that, right? To go witness. And if we need a system that needs to verify signatures, we have a very flawed system, because you don't have to verify so many signatures over there on the elections over in Nicaragua, because the person's signing right in front of another person with his ID right there.
Yeah.
That's the system we need.
Yeah.
So
what I fear how bad this gets, because I hear from other, super liberals that go, hey, it's really important that, even for me to even do this show is dangerous, that it's gonna make people not have faith in the system. And I'm like, I don't give a shit personally. Like, no. I want it to be fair. And if my team wins, great. If my team loses, okay, that's fair. But, I think it's just outrageous that everybody wouldn't want that. And the weird thing is, this world we're living in right now, Craig, I remember vividly a time when this was the bedrock of the liberal party, free speech, absolutists and elections integrity just seemed like the bedrock, foundational for that party. And all of a sudden it's like, not the case. And that scares me. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know what that is. It just feels so weird right now.
I would look to, I know this might seem a little bit off kilter, but I would look at CIA programs or FBI programs, stuff like COINTELPRO, where in fact the FBI had talked, and this is from Hoover years ago, when they eliminated people like, what's his name? Oh my God, I can't remember. The guy who was the head of the Chicago Black Panthers party.
Garrett, Google
By the
it.
way, somebody remember the name? Katie Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs. Yeah, you can't even remember. That's how.
Yeah.
Actually,
I was thinking
Wayner in the chat.
I was thinking,
Ron.
What's that?
Oh, Ron in the chat actually put that up there a little bit before, but we already kind of brushed past.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Katie Hobbs. Yeah.
Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was
Fred
killed
Hampton.
Fred Hampton was part of. He ran the Rainbow Coalition.
Yep.
He was bringing together an economic force with people who were disenfranchised by the state. He had the Young Patriots in Chicago that were descendants of Indiana and other white people of the South. The Latin Kings. He brought them together, and they had him removed, killed at a young age. They had all these groups a long time ago. They had these plans, and one of them is called COINTELPRO, in which they would infiltrate all these groups. So you have a lot of these groups that are infiltrated by intelligence apparatus and meant to be turned on their heads. And that's why we're at a spot, because they find the useful idiots and they put all these crazy narcissist sociopaths in charge who will do the things that they need them to do. And they'll twist all these movements. So any opposition to what's been going on from the state, a lot of it has been twisted and turned and co-opted, and we're seeing this all the time. Listen, the whole Donald Trump situation, Donald Trump should be the president. I believe he won in 2020. But when you give somebody the next best option, people will matriculate to the next best option. That's what they've made Donald Trump right now. They made him the lesser of two evils. He's the next best option, so people are going to matriculate towards him. But when you have a system that can shut out any of these independent voices and not allow people, a representative of the people, of the overall people, to take power, you're just going to accept what's given to you. And that's the system we're in right now. And that's why you see so many people going along with this, because they've had leaders of these groups. And I've seen people being thrown out of a lot of these groups on the left. You know, this is where I'm from. I see smart figureheads that are thrown out on the left because they think for themselves. And the people they put in charge are just sheep herders. And because of what we talked about in the beginning of the show, confirmation bias, the social engineers know that they can lead people to certain spots, and that's what they're doing, leading people to certain spots.
Do you think that's the case? Are you talking about people like Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, people that are historically Democrat Party left that, you know, if it's true, it sounds criminal what happened to Bobby Kennedy's campaign. It sounds reminiscent of what happened to Bernie Sanders' campaign by that.
I don't know when it comes to those particular two people. Those are two people I supported. I supported Tulsi Gabbard's campaign vigorously.
Yeah.
I left Bernie Sanders in 2018, 2019 to go support that campaign because I thought she was the next best option as far as being an anti-imperialist and an anti-interventionist. That's where I met a lot of my libertarian friends that I have to this day.
Yeah.
However, her turn and her pivot and the way she is being very pro-Zionist is very suspicious. I honestly believe that RFK is compromised. I don't believe he's just getting it wrong. I believe that he is compromised and he's owned by Israel, and that's why he's going to make the decisions he makes. And that's really hard for a lot of people because at the end of the day, if you want to take on power, you have to take on power. And if you're going to capitulate to power at the top, the way RFK has done, whether he be compromised or not, a lot of people think he's compromised from his Epstein days, right? So, I mean, it's really hard to go and support those people doing those things. But I mean, once again, you get the half truths, and we're always made to believe that, oh my God, that Tulsi's the victim, RFK's the victim. Now let's follow them. But where are they taking us? Where are they moving us? We got to be careful because the intelligence apparatus is that smart. They understand that we're going to have shows like this, that they can't shut everybody up. And some people are going to start thinking for themselves and learning for themselves. How do we steer them back into the mechanism, which they're doing right now? Donald Trump is pretty much sheep herding you into the two-party duopoly. Of course, is he better than Kamala Harris? Of course he is. But if he's part of the same apparatus that's going to move you into a certain spot, and then he's going to use guys like J.D. Vance to move us into digital IDs and CBDCs, we got to be careful of what we're doing. I mean, that's how ahead of the game the intelligence and the ruling class is. It's a quagmire of sorts. It's going to be hard to figure our way out of it.
Yeah.
we do have to look at this whole picture internally, and see it for what it is and make sure we're not getting duped.
Do you think, because this is a big talking point with the right now, too big to rig. We need to turn out the vote, and we're too big to rig.
Same
I
thing we
don't
said.
believe that exists. I don't
It's
think
not true.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because I do hear this too as well.
Yeah.
Donald Trump said it yesterday. Brett Weinstein said it the other day. We thought we could do it with Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primary. It cannot be done. You're not going to overwhelm the cheating of the vote. Joe Biden got more votes than anybody in the history to ever hold that thing.
Yeah.
You're talking about maybe 10 million fraudulent votes spread across 6 counties or several counties that he got.
Yeah.
There's no way to overwhelm that. You have to change the system. Had they concentrated on doing one thing, eliminating ballot harvesting this time out, and once again, being very privileged, Mike and Garrett, to go over to Colombia, right? Colombia is the spot where I saw one election, they changed this thing. The next election, they changed this thing. The third election, they changed this thing. And even still, in their particular situation, they had a compromise candidate, right? Let's say that Donald Trump is a compromise candidate. They chose a guy, Gustavo Petro, who a lot of the leftists didn't like, but they wanted him because they thought he was the greatest to transition them into the way of moving forward they needed to move forward to. But more than anything, they had fought election after election after election. They understood the system. They learned the system. They learned where it was weak, and they created a system which they knew was more transparent than any Colombia election they ever had last time out. We could have done the thing if we had started the process of chipping away at the things that are bad and pushing for full transparency. We didn't. Instead, the Republican Party went on a witch hunt and looked for the fraudsters inside a fraudulent system. It doesn't work that way. Sorry.
Well, no, there's stuff that has come up over the years. The SAFE Act, the SAVE Act, those types of things. I see you rolling your eyes already. Where it's safety in the American Federal Elections Act, safety in the American Voting, Election Act, and it's a big story. I think it was the SAVE Act was the last one, HR 1822 or something. Yeah. And it seems like it went down party lines. I don't know why. I don't know if that was a standalone bill or if there's a bunch of shit in there that made.
I don't think it got passed by the Senate. I think it made it through the House.
Made it through the House. Yes.
Yeah. Didn't make it through the Senate. And at the end of the day, it was marketed wrong. And they were, once again, they were trying to eliminate the exploitation of a migrant ballot by making it automatic registration. In other words, they would within that act, they wanted to say, hey, you have to ask the person, are you an American citizen? Are you legal to vote? Right. And they have to fill that out in certain states. You can't get away with that. You don't need, in Maricopa County, that immigrant's going to be issued a ballot. So they were trying to stop the mechanism. But once again, they didn't market it properly. They were still blaming the immigrant themselves. They were still tapping into the xenophobia. So they didn't sell it the right way. You know what I'm saying? And they're still kind of misleading people. Donald Trump's misleading people.
Do you think those acts would have done anything? Do you think that's on the right track? Some of those provisions, I see. I have a study here. I don't remember. It might have been Daily Wire that I printed this from, but I don't. A new study suggests as many as 2.7 million non-citizens could vote in the 24 election, leading some to voice concerns. Just Facts. Are you familiar with Just Facts? Nonprofit. Research Institute found that about 10 to 27% of non-citizen U.S. adults are now legally registered to vote. The U.S. Census recorded more than 19 million adult non-citizens living in the U.S. Given their registration rates, this means about 2 to 5 million are illegally registered to vote. Figures are potentially high enough to overturn the will of the American people.
They didn't register to vote. They didn't illegitimately registered to vote. They were just getting a driver's license and got an issued a ballot for that. So they have to eliminate that loophole. And once again, it's not the immigrant themselves that are taking in those ballots. Here's another thing. How about this? I don't even need illegal immigrants to make up ballots to vote. If I'm close in with the ballot making company, I can start a fictional character. I can have Donald Duck vote. I have Minnie Mouse vote. Once again, there's no chain of custody. You don't have to create a voter to swing an election in today's election system. You just have to create a ballot, and there's ways to get ballots.
See, so what do you say? What do you say to the people that are hardcore in this, and they go, "Hey, look, man, it's illegal federally. These people are going to prison. If they get caught illegally voting where they're not allowed to, they go to prison."
Yeah. They're duping the people to look in the area. They're looking over here. The ball. I'm sorry, I got it in my hands.
Yeah.
They're looking over here. The ball is in this hand.
Yeah.
They're looking over
Magician's trick.
at the end of the day, I'll retract back to that, Mike. You don't need a voter to swing an election in America. You just need a ballot. They have to worry about the access to ballots, shotgunning of ballots. And they are able to do this with this mechanism of mass mail-in ballots. And they were able to pull that off because of the COVID-19. And that's why they're always keeping the threat of another virus very close, whether it be the bird flu, crackerpox, whatever. You don't need a voter. It's not the voter. It's the ballot. So if you eliminate automatic registration and now immigrants can't get ballots sent out, what's the other way to do it? You can just get the printing company to give you fake ballots, fictional people. In fact, we were seeing in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were just doing another hearing, not in Atlanta, but the other county, and they were talking about there's all these people who move and they leave or they die, but yet a ballot is still generated for them.
Yeah.
We have those people too. We have to get away from mass mail-in ballots. And that's the thing that just drove me crazy, is that there's a lot of party members on the right that are okay with mail-in ballots. It's not just mail-in ballots, it's mass mail-in ballots. How does somebody get the right to have a mail-in ballot is just as important as the mail-in ballot system itself.
To your point, I believe Garrett got 2 votes mail. 2, didn't you get 2 of them mailed to you, Garrett? Now,
no, just the one, but it was also half filled out already.
So what would happen if he signed that Minnie Mouse and sent it in? But I'm voting for Kamala Harris. I'm voting for Donald Trump. Sign Minnie Mouse. Would they catch that? Would that be flagged, or is that kind of what you're talking about?
It all depends on the county, and that's another part. Is that in a lot of these national votes, there was a national system. These are county systems. So what happens in your county might be different than the other counties. But if you have a lot of areas in which there's no chain of custody, anything can happen.
We'll kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm in the same county as Detroit, so
Oakland or Wayne.
Yep,
You're in Wayne County.
Yep.
Yeah. This scares the shit out of me for many reasons. Obviously, Craig, it has to be really frustrating for someone like you to see what's going on, be fully informed about it, and recognize that so few people in the country even know about it or even seemingly care. They're just unaware. They're unaware.
You said it earlier in your interview. It's not a sexy subject, right? It's. You ever see the movie Rounders?
Probably years ago. I don't remember.
Matt Damon, Edward Norton. It's the poker movie, right? It's one of the best poker movies. And one of the scenes in the very beginning is so telling. And this is something I learned when it came to elections. And I'm a poker player. I'm an ex-poker player. And that's why I kind of adopted the mindset of elections, because elections is just a contest, right? It's just a game. So I would look at all the ins and outs. In the movie, in Rounders, in the very beginning, he's a law student. He's trying to be a lawyer. And he goes into the judge he's clerking for, who's playing with all the other judges. And he's playing with they're playing poker, friendly poker game with all the other judges. Now, this is some of the top minds in the world sitting at this table playing poker. And he's teaching them how to play poker and showing them the ins and outs of pokers. And they're just blown away. You're never going to be familiar with the waters you're not swimming in. It's just the way it is. But the waters you are swimming in, you'll be very, very familiar with them. If you swim around a reef and you go into this certain area of the water, you're going to become familiar with it. But if you're not paying attention to it, and it's not a sexy subject, you're not going to know anything about it. And it's going to be easy for people to pull the wool over your eyes. Yeah. And that's what's going on over here. It's beyond frustrating.
Well, I've been living in a world where my whole thing is the system requires certain things in place to work right. And one of those really important things is a legitimate media landscape doing its job of holding the powerful to account. And as someone who's been in media, mainstream, everything for my entire adult life, to see the collapse of that and people are sick of hearing me talk about it. But I can't help it. It's got to be equally frustrating for you, where it's like, if you only knew the level of fuckery that's going on, you wouldn't believe it. But people don't want to believe it. They want to believe that, CNN told me it's great, or the New York Times wrote an article, it must be true. And it's really troubling. The elections, it really kind of exposed itself in 2016. I understand that it was going on, or 2020. I understand it's been going on a lot longer. And just learning it now is really troubling, man. It's like finding out something you've enjoyed and loved your whole life was rigged the whole time. And, it's like, holy shit. It calls into question everything that, what we won that championship in 2010. What do you mean? No, it was bullshit. Like, and I don't know. Do you have any hope for the future, Craig, that people are going to wake up, that there is a solution, that there is a way to protect stuff like this? Or, I hate to think it's hopeless, but I don't know, when you've got powerful on top that want to protect what they believe, what they do and how they operate, and a media landscape that's poisoned and not doing its job and even questioning them, it's really hard to move the ball forward.
Yeah. Well, anything's possible, right? And I know the feeling, because when you discover and you see a lot of stuff that the ruling class has been doing for so long, and so many things are tied into the whole state, what they're doing.
Yeah.
The program, the Empire Education I mentioned to you guys. I mean, you guys all, went to school, and you've noticed what they teach us. Like I said, they teach us that America is like a driving force for good, going around and defending, human life everywhere.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers, we've probably killed more people on this planet than anybody, or at least been behind the funding to kill a lot of people. I mean, if you look into World War II, we funded parties on both sides of this whole situation, this Malthusian project. Anything is possible. I think you hit it on the nose too, as well. I told you before the show, I'm coming off a time today where it's just like, they're killing any independent media out there now. I mean, TNT radio just got shut down last week. They can't find the funding. There's been an attack on RT again. And you would think that, most people in this country would say, listen, I want to know what the other side, who has nuclear weapons, what they have to say. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. I can handle it. To be told that you can't hear it because they're protecting you. We're in some very, very dark times. And, I don't know what to make of a lot of things. When you go deep into these situations and you look at the World Economic Forum and you look at these people like Klaus Schwab or above them, what are they really trying to do? What are they capable of doing? Right now, it does seem as dark as it's ever been. The censorship on the voices out there, talking to you about this whole situation and saying, be careful, Mike, because what you're doing, you're going into an area where you're going to get flagged, you're going to get censored, you're going to get demonetized, you're going to be shut down. You know what I'm saying? That's scary to even do that, because like I said, we're in the United States. We were all about open conversations and discussions, and that's what we were built upon. You can say whatever you want in this country as long as you're not inciting violence, go for it. We're not there anymore.
No.
We're in a completely controlled environment.
And I'll tell you,
mainstream
Craig,
media is one of the biggest villains of all time, and it's going to be hard for all of us to get out of it. I don't know how or when we will get out of it. Sorry, buddy.
No, you're great. And I appreciate it. And I couldn't agree more. I used to go and, check out the Young Turks. Let's see what that argument is they're presenting. The Jimmy Dores of the world, when he has cogent conversations and he's a traditional lefty, and I go, wow, I never thought about it that way. That's interesting what he's saying about Medicare for all or stuff. And he absolutely changed my mind on Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. Those are important voices that typically I wouldn't necessarily, I probably agree with more than I even realized. But if you censor that voice, if you shut that down, then I don't get that argument. I get the talking points from CNN, and we're less informed. Now we're fighting with each other. And all it took was 10 minutes of Jimmy Dore kind of going into detail with you on a subject and going, holy shit, I need to hear more about that. I need to know more about what that other side of the story is. And I don't think it's by accident that it's hard to find your interview on election integrity. It's not because it was a boring interview. It's not because it wasn't informative or entertaining. There's no reason Googling you, Jimmy Dore, an election, that shouldn't pop up right away, but it doesn't. Yeah, it should tell people something.
It should. I mean, there was somebody who said a long time ago that you got to look at the people who are getting censored and demonetized. Why are they getting censored and demonetized? If the ruling class doesn't want you to hear what they have to say, then they probably have something valuable to say. And you may want to listen to them, and it's going to be a struggle. Look, I really am very happy that there's guys like yourself who are doing this right now. And that's what it's going to take, right? It's going to take the independent world to kind of get out there. YouTube seems like a dead end. We're going to have to find other mechanisms and other ways until they become extinct. And we have to be careful because they can become extinct. Peter Thiel has a big part to play when it comes to Rumble. So now they're sheep herding everybody over to Rumble. What's happened when they're going to pull the plug over there? So we're going to have to use every single tool out there, everything we can do. I mean, a lot about COVID, I think, was making sure that people can't be in the same room together so they can't have conversations. I believe it was all about that when it goes down to that. I mean, we're at a time of mass acceleration, and it's going to only get dirtier before it gets cleaner. And, right now I'm in survival mode when I should be in thriving mode. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
dude, it bothers. When I've seen you talk at length, and I have found some interviews, I watched them. That's where I get a lot of my notes from to ask you questions that, it seems insane to me. 20 years ago, it's like that guy would be on 60 Minutes. They'd be doing a story on 60 Minutes about this. And I know there's not a chance in hell that you're going to be on anything. You're not going to be interviewed on Fox News about this. You're not going to be interviewed on CNN about this. And that's tragic to me. It's tragic.
Well, there's a lot of people too that I've looked up to. There's mentors of mine that didn't get the same opportunity. They're facing the same type of suppression. So, I wear it as a badge of honor. And thank you so much, for highlighting that. I'm glad that, believe it or not, when I see people like yourself reach out to me and say, hey, I want to talk about this, it encourages me to keep going and keep doing this.
Please
type of work.
do.
I don't want to stop doing it. And there's a lot of hurdles. There's hurdles on the left. I mean, look, when I was introduced at Defeat the Mandates in DC for the first one I went there, they would say, this is a common sense leftist. Now, I don't even know what's right and what's left anymore anyways, but the fact that they're saying that this is a common sense person, encouraging the fact that people who are normally on the different side of the fence than us can still come together and have conversations and agreements, and we can say we can come together on certain issues. That's what gives me hope out there. Yeah. And that's the only light I have right now at the end of my time. It's obvious to me they're not going to allow me to make a living doing this. You know what I'm saying? They're
right
shutting
now,
out
they're
all
not.
the means of that. So
Well, keep fighting the good fight, man. I mean it. It's important. There are some of us listening. It's not lost on us. And I think at the end of the day, we really all do as citizens, not the elite, but as citizens want a level playing field, and it's attainable. It's scary. And I do appreciate people like you, Craig Jardula. Thank you so much. At Yo Pasta on X, the Convo Couch Pasta to Go on YouTube. Is there anything else you want to mention?
No, man. If I get to Scottsdale, I get back out there, I'll look you up. We'll go have some fun out there, I
love it.
Keep doing what you're doing. Maybe you'll have a studio I can come in there and get cozy with you at and have a couple of shows while I'm in town.
100%.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And thank you, Garrett, for doing this stuff. It's really important work. And keep on doing it. Keep having the conversations out there because the conversations are what's important.
I couldn't agree more. You're more than welcome here in Scottsdale. The studio should be done hopefully in a couple months, brother. And this will be the last show of the week, everybody. I'm flying off to Dallas tomorrow. You can catch me on Normal World with Dave Landau. I'll be in studio with those guys Thursday. I believe it's 10 p.m. Eastern. So that'll have me in Dallas until Friday. We'll be back Monday for sure, but check it out. Check out Normal World. That's always fun with those guys. Craig, thank you, man. Godspeed. Be safe out there and keep up the